Chapter 40. The bell's resounding gong seemed to vibrate through every corner of the mansion, dragging Tyler from a deep, restless sleep. His eyes snapped open, and for a moment, he almost wished he could bury himself in the pillows and pretend the noise hadn't reached his ears. It was the kind of wake-up call that could stir even the heaviest sleepers from their dreams, and Tyler was no exception. With a groan, he swung his legs off the bed and sat up. His mind was still sluggish, the remnants of a dream slipping away like smoke. But there was no time for that now. The Addams household had its own rhythm, and it wasn't one that allowed for leisurely mornings. Tyler dragged himself to the window, peering out at the snow-covered landscape as the first light of dawn cast a pale glow across the mansion. The world outside seemed frozen in time, almost as if the chaotic energy of the night before had somehow been absorbed by the stillness of the early hours. He quickly dressed in a loose-fitting shirt and dark pants, the familiar weight of his own thoughts pressing down on him. As he adjusted his collar, his thoughts wandered to Wednesday, wondering if she'd slept any better than he had. Their night at the market had been, surprisingly, full of warmth and ease. The thought of sharing more moments like that, without the usual tension, left him feeling, well, different. In a good way. He wasn't sure if he could explain it, but he was starting to appreciate it more than he expected. Heading downstairs, the scent of something rich and aromatic, coffee, drifted up to meet him. Tyler followed the smell to the dining room, where the usual morning scene of the Addams family was unfolding. The long table was already set, and the towering figures of Morticia and Gomez Addams sat at opposite ends. Pugsley was hunched over a plate of something that could only be described as a breakfast experiment, while Wednesday, ever the picture of composure, was seated to his left, sipping a cup of something dark and mysterious. At the far end of the table, Grandma, Endora, was busy inspecting her nails, her disapproval of something clearly written across her face. Tyler was halfway to his seat when he noticed Calpurnia, standing tall with a certain air of command, holding a cup of coffee. Her daughter, little Calliope, was seated beside her, eating a bowl of something colorful and bizarre. "Good morning," Tyler said, taking a seat between Wednesday and Grandma. A quiet greeting was exchanged as he poured himself a cup of coffee and settled in. Despite the chaos of the Addams household, mornings always had a peculiar kind of tranquility to them. "Seems like Cousin Adele won't be able to join us for Christmas this year," Calpurnia said, her voice smooth but tinged with something between disappointment and resignation. Tyler's heart sank at the mention of Adele's name. He knew the mess at Nevermore Academy had been ongoing, and part of him had hoped that Adele might have the chance to visit, despite the chaos. But he could understand why she wouldn't be able to make it. His presence had complicated things more than he cared to admit. "She has a lot of things to do in Washington with everything that happened at Nevermore," Morticia added, her tone soft but still carrying a hint of sorrow. "There's a lot of cleaning up to do. But at least Judah and Leah will be here." Tyler nodded, relieved that at least some familiar faces would be joining the festivities. Judah and Leah had been part of the family trip to England the previous spring, and Tyler had grown quite fond of them during their time together. "I really don't know what got into the Nevermore Academy board members that they thought it was a good idea to hire a normie teacher," Calpurnia said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took a sip of her coffee. Tyler felt a knot tighten in his stomach at the mention of Nevermore. If it weren't for him and the chaos he had inadvertently brought, Adele would be here with them instead of cleaning up the aftermath of his actions. He didn't know whether to feel guilty or angry, but the pang of regret was sharp. "When will Cousin Judah and his fiancée arrive here?" Pugsley asked, breaking the momentary silence. Tyler was grateful for the distraction, focusing on Pugsley's question. "They should be here by noon, if there are no flight delays," Gomez said with a grin, clearly excited to see Judah. Grandmama, who had been quiet up until this point, let out an audible sigh. "Work is not an excuse to avoid spending time with your family during the holidays. Even in Washington." Her voice was firm, but the underlying disapproval made it clear how much she disliked the idea of Adele working on Christmas. Tyler's thoughts were interrupted as Morticia turned to him with a soft, almost secretive smile. "Tyler, darling, we will be hosting our annual Christmas ball here in the mansion this year. I've already prepared a fine suit for you. She said it as though it were the most natural thing in the world, her eyes gleaming with excitement. A Christmas ball? Tyler repeated, surprised. I don't think I've ever been to one of those. Yes, darling, it's our turn to host it this year, Morticia replied, her smile widening. Tyler furrowed his brow, glancing around the table. Where was it last year? It was in France, Calpurnia said with a hint of disappointment in her voice. It's a shame we couldn't find Uncle Knick-Knack in time for the ball last year. Tyler, his mind racing, couldn't help but wonder how they would manage to get a skeletal family member through airport security, but he wisely kept his thoughts to himself. At that moment, Morticia leaned toward Tyler, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial tone. Darling, with all the family members coming, would you mind sharing a room with Wednesday for the holiday? In case we end up short of rooms. Tyler froze, his eyes widening as he processed what she said. A moment of awkward silence passed before the Hyde took over. Of course, I'll move my luggage as soon as the guests start arriving, Mrs. Addams, Hyde said, a mischievous glint in his voice. The suggestion hung in the air, and Tyler's face went a little pale at the unspoken implications of sharing a room with Wednesday, especially with the way Morticia phrased the question. The Hyde's voice echoed in Tyler's mind. Didn't you get it? There's no choice. We'll have to share a room with her. Tyler glanced at Morticia, Gomez, and Calpurnia, who seemed entirely unconcerned by the arrangement. The family's casual attitude towards such matters was both unsettling and strangely freeing. They were so unbothered by the notion. As if nothing at all was out of the ordinary. Why not? Hyde whispered again, clearly entertained by the idea. This will be fun. Tyler, still taken aback, stared across the table at the Addams family, who seemed unfazed by the suggestion. It was strange to him how comfortable they were with the idea, but as the conversation continued, Tyler couldn't shake the thought, this was just another day in the strange, unpredictable world of the Addams family. The morning was filled with the rhythmic sound of logs being chopped, the occasional sharp clink of an axe hitting wood, and the heavy thud as Lurch, towering over Tyler, expertly split the firewood with his usual silent grace. Meanwhile, Thing, darting around at lightning speed, made sure each pile of firewood was neatly distributed to the various rooms of the mansion. Tyler had learned long ago that in the Addams household, the idea of normalcy went out the window the moment the sun rose. Stop complaining, will you? Tyler muttered, shaking his head as he grabbed another log. Inside his head, Hyde's voice rang out with impatience. If it weren't for Morticia and Gomez allowing us to sleep in the same room as Cockroach, you'd be the one doing all of this, Tyler. Tyler paused, the axe hovering in the air for a moment. At least you got it done in time, he said, setting the axe down and wiping the sweat off his brow. I'll move our luggage to Wednesday's room. A low, almost inaudible hum of annoyance echoed from the Hyde's side of his mind. Fine. But we're not done yet, Hyde grumbled. Tyler sighed and took over control of his body, grabbing the bag he'd packed earlier and headed across the hallway, to Wednesday's room. The thought of sharing a room with her for the holidays still gnawed at him, though the more he thought about it, the less it seemed to bother him. It was just another layer of bizarre in the Addams family's unpredictable existence. Once he'd moved his things and tidied up, Tyler noticed a classic old car pulling up the long, winding driveway. Its distinctive style screamed Addams, and Tyler's heart gave a little skip. It had to be Judah and Leah. He quickly ran downstairs to greet them. As he reached the front door, the first to step out were Morticia and Gomez, dressed in their usual elegant attire, the sheer presence of them enough to make the cold morning air feel warm. Ah, Tyler. We're so glad you could help prepare for the festivities. Gomez greeted him with a wide grin, slapping him lightly on the back. Of course, Tyler replied with a smile. Anything to help out. Behind them, Wednesday stood like a shadow, her cool gaze fixed ahead. Calpurnia and little Calliope were beside her, the younger girl clutching something oddly colored in her hands, perhaps another strange creation she'd made this morning. Tyler's attention snapped back to the road as the car came to a stop. The door opened, and out stepped Judah, a tall, pale figure with a strikingly handsome appearance, his dark eyes gleaming with curiosity as he looked around the mansion. Beside him was Leah, petite and fair, her long, wavy blonde hair flowing gracefully as she stepped out, looking both elegant and comfortable in her own skin. Tyler raised his hand to wave, but what truly caught his attention was the figure behind them. Uncle Fester. The tall, bald man with his usual clean-shaven face stepped out of the back seat with his arms wide, ready for a hug or perhaps just a warm welcome, his unfiltered energy immediately apparent. "Ah, Fester!" Gomez exclaimed, his voice rising with excitement as he rushed to greet his brother. "It's good to have you back." Fester's grin widened as he embraced Gomez, lifting him off the ground for a moment. "It's been too long, my dear brother. And look at this place, hasn't changed a bit. It's as if I never left." "Uncle Fester, it's so good to see you," Pugsley said, excitedly running up to him and offering a handshake. "Always a pleasure to see my favorite nephew," Fester said with a grin, ruffling Pugsley's hair. Calpurnia stood to the side, a small, knowing smile on her lips as she exchanged a brief glance with Morticia. "I see you brought a little extra chaos this time, Fester," she said lightly, her voice carrying a hint of both affection and playful annoyance. "Oh, it's just how I roll," Fester responded, winking as he took a long look around. "And look at all the familiar faces. This place feels like home." Tyler stepped forward, extending his hand to Judah, who took it warmly. "Good to see you, Judah." "Leah, it's great to have you both back." "It's good to be here, Tyler," Judah said with a smile. "The mansion never fails to impress. And I see you're still surviving the Addams chaos." Leah smiled as well, her eyes twinkling. "Wouldn't miss this for the world." As the family exchanged greetings and hugs, Lurch, ever the stoic butler, stepped forward to take their luggage, his towering presence immediately making itself known. Things skittered past at high speed, almost a blur, delivering a stack of firewood into the entrance hall, never missing a beat as the family continued to settle in. "I trust the trip was uneventful?" Morticia asked, her eyes gleaming with a soft amusement as she observed Fester's antics. "Uneventful is for the weak," Fester replied with a laugh. "And I'm anything but weak." Wednesday remained in the background, her quiet composure, contrasting with the warm welcome around her. She barely glanced at Tyler, though her lips curled slightly in a brief, knowing smile. As the final arrivals filtered in, the atmosphere was thick with the same odd blend of warmth, eccentricity, and, of course, chaos that had always defined the Addams family. They were all here, gathered under one roof once more, ready for another Addams holiday that would undoubtedly become one for the books. Tyler couldn't help but feel both out of place and oddly at home, his place in this strange family growing clearer with every passing moment. He just hoped he could navigate the next few days without losing too much of himself, or, perhaps more importantly, without getting completely swept away by the madness that was sure to unfold. The afternoon sun cast long, eerie shadows across the mansion as Leah wandered through its grand hallways. The sheer opulence of the Addams estate in America rivaled the Gothic splendor of the one she had visited in England. Every corner of the mansion was a masterpiece of macabre luxury, towering candelabras dripping with black wax, intricately carved wooden staircases that creaked despite their polish, and chandeliers adorned with what she was fairly certain were real bat bones. She had meant to rest like Judah, but her curiosity got the better of her. There was always something new to discover in an Addams home. With Judah taking a well-earned nap after their long flight, Leah took her time exploring. The deeper she ventured into the mansion, the stranger, and more fascinating, the sights became. She passed a long hallway lined with old family portraits, the eyes in some of them following her movements. A suit of armor tilted its head ever so slightly as she walked by, making her quicken her pace. She stepped into what appeared to be a study, only to be greeted by an enormous taxidermy bear standing on its hind legs, its mouth frozen mid-snarl. "Charming," she murmured, shaking her head with a smile. After what felt like an hour of wandering, she found herself in a part of the house she hadn't seen before. The heavy scent of damp earth and exotic flora filled the air. The temperature was slightly warmer, more humid. Curious, Leah followed the scent and soon reached a set of tall glass doors. Through them, she could see a sprawling greenhouse, overgrown with all manner of strange plants, twisting vines, and what looked like movement. She hesitated before stepping inside. As soon as she did, a low growl rumbled through the space. Leah's breath hitched as her gaze landed on the source, a lion. A real, adolescent lion, its golden mane slightly darker in the dim lighting. Its tail flicked lazily as it stood by an enormous iron-wrought feeding dish. And beside it, completely unfazed, was Tyler. He was rolling in a large tray cart stacked with slabs of raw meat, his sleeves pushed up, revealing his toned forearms. His expression was focused as he methodically placed a hefty portion into the lion's dish. The beast let out a satisfied grunt before digging in. Leah's shock quickly turned into intrigue. Tyler had been an outsider once, but now? He moved through the mansion's chaos like he belonged, because, in a way, he did. Before she could call out to him, she noticed something strange. He was talking to himself. Or rather, arguing. Tyler turned, lifting another cut of meat, his brows furrowed. For the last time, they're letting us stay here for free. We should help out however we can. Leah frowned. Who was he talking to? Then he scowled and shook his head, muttering under his breath. Surely they don't expect us to work at the ball. His voice had a sharper edge this time, as if it weren't entirely his own. Leah took a step closer. Tyler? He froze, shoulders stiffening. Slowly, he turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. Leah. Didn't see you there. Her gaze flicked to the tray cart, then back to him. Who were you talking to? For a split second, there was hesitation in his eyes. Then he exhaled through his nose and forced a smirk. Just thinking out loud. Leah wasn't convinced. She'd seen people talk to themselves before, but this? This was different. It was like he was carrying on a full conversation with someone who wasn't there. Or maybe, was. She crossed her arms. Right. So, you argue with yourself about working at the ball? Tyler huffed, rubbing the back of his neck. It's complicated. Leah studied him for a moment before deciding to let it go. If it was something important, she figured he'd tell her eventually. Instead, she let her curiosity shift elsewhere. Her eyes flickered toward the massive carnivorous plant on the far end of the greenhouse, its thick vines coiled like a waiting predator. And what's that? She asked, nodding toward it. Tyler followed her gaze and smirked. That's Cleopatra. Leah raised a brow. Cleopatra? She's Aunt Morticia's. Tyler explained, grabbing a thick steak and tossing it toward the plant. In a flash, one of Cleopatra's vines snapped forward, catching the meat midair, before curling it into its gaping maw. Leah watched in both horror and fascination as the plant devoured its meal, with a grotesque, wet squelch. I see, she said slowly. Tyler chuckled. She likes fresh meat. Piranhas, too. Leah turned her head, finally noticing the large fish tank nearby. The water was swirling as the school of piranhas within thrashed, eagerly tearing into their own serving of food. Leah exhaled, shaking her head in amusement. Only in the Addams family. Tyler smirked, picking up the last of the meat to finish feeding the rest of the creatures. The lion let out a low chuff of satisfaction, while the reptiles coiled and slithered in their enclosures, their hunger momentarily sated. Leah watched him work, feeling an odd sense of kinship with him. Like her, he wasn't born into this madness, but he was becoming part of it. Just like she would be. So, she said after a moment, leaning against the greenhouse's ornate railing, you really are in deep with them now, huh? Tyler glanced up, wiping his hands off on a rag. He didn't answer immediately, but when he did, there was no hesitation in his voice. Yeah, he said. I guess I am. Leah nodded. She understood. Because soon enough, she would be too. Tyler pushed the cart through the dimly lit hallway, the distant murmur of voices, and the occasional cackle of unseen creatures echoing through the vast estate. Shadows stretched long against the Gothic walls, flickering under candlelight, but the real presence haunting him was inside his own head. Her eyes. Where have I seen those eyes before? Hyde's voice slithered through Tyler's mind, low and thoughtful. Tyler's grip tightened on the cart handle. Leah is a siren, he muttered under his breath. A beat of silence. Then, a slow, amused chuckle. Oh, Hyde drawled. Well, that explains a lot. Those eyes, they have that pull, don't they? Like they could drag you under if you're not careful. Tyler exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders. It's not like that. Isn't it? Hyde countered, his voice dripping with knowing amusement. You sure you're not just a little bit entranced? Or is it that you don't want to admit you recognize something in her? Something like, us? Tyler scowled, keeping his voice low. She's not like us. Hyde hummed in consideration. No. But she's not normal either. And that means she sees things. Might even see me one day. Tyler clenched his jaw. She doesn't need to know about you. Oh, but she will. Just like Wednesday did. Hyde's voice was teasing, but there was a sharp edge underneath. And tell me, how do you think she'll react when she finds out? When she realizes what you really are? Tyler didn't answer. The mansion stretched ahead of him, its corridors growing darker, colder. A faint chill settled into his bones as he wheeled the cart past rows of ancient suits of armor and faded family portraits with eyes that seemed to follow his every move. Like, comment and subscribe to be notified for updates in the series.